Well, I'll preface this talk briefly by saying, can you spot the three groups I shall be alluding to by quotes from pieces of their music about 2/3 the way through the actual sermon? Now, if you get all three, you're doing very well indeed, very well indeed. And might I say, it will reflect your age as well, but still don't mind. So this story from Luke, I think it's probably, I've preached on this for quite a while. But I love this story because it presents a real physicality. We've got the presence of skin and bones. We've got taste buds. We've got nerve endings. And we've got disciples coming to faith. Indeed, all of Jesus' post-resurrection appearances in the Gospels centre on this physical, the physicality, the rawness of seeing Jesus right in front of you. Jesus doesn't manifest as a kind of a disembodied voice from heaven that waxes eloquent on the philosophical implications of death and life. Instead, he shows up with hands and feet, scars and wounds. He receives the tearful embrace of Mary Magdalene, who doesn't want to let him go. He makes footprints on the Emmaus Road with two of his, shall we say, confused friends. He turns into chunks of bread with his scarred hands. He chews on a piece of fish, for heaven's sake. He makes a barbecue on the beach and cooks breakfast for his friends. And for me, this physicality, this embodied Jesus of Easter, is the Jesus that I've come to recognise from the whole witness of the Gospels. And that recognition is both precious and essential, and I'll explain. The Jesus of Easter is the Jesus of the Incarnation. The Jesus who grows in a womb, enters the world through a birth canal, sleeps in a feeding trough, and nurses at Mary's breast. It is the Jesus who scrapes his knees, plays footy with his mates, loses his parents during Passover, and grows up in the backwaters of Nazareth. This is the same Jesus who soaks in the waters of baptism, hungers for bread in the Judean wilderness, weeps at his friend's grave, uses a whip in the temple, appreciates scented oils on his feet and head, sweats blood in the Garden of Gethsemane. He endures betrayal and suffers asphyxiation on a Roman cross. It's the same Jesus. And in the Gospel I read out to you in that Message translation, he says, it's really me. Jesus tells his gobsmacked disciples as they struggle to reorder all that they know about life and death, souls and bodies, in the aftermath of this astonishing appearance. It's really me, he says. Me, the one you know, the one you love, the one you trust. Touch me and see. And so when I reflected on this, I came to the conclusion that I need a saviour like a body like mine. A body that adores, worships and celebrates, but also a body that fails, ages, aches, breaks, and eventually dies. A body that carries wounds and scars, visible and invisible, fresh and faded. I was just recently looking at my knees and my shin after coming back from a run. And I'd forgotten about some of the scars and wounds that I got on my leg from playing rugby many years ago, and from the results of a lipoma that had grown and subsequently been removed from my shin. The scars are still there. And that's how you would recognise me. I remember many years ago applying to join the army, and I had a medical, and They did the usual stuff in the medical, and then they said, "Have you got any scars?" I said, "Well, I don't know, you go and have a look." And so they detected some scars again on my knees and on my shins. And I said, "What do you want these for?" And they said, "It's in case the inevitable happens. We can identify you then." So a body that carries wounds and scars, visible and invisible, fresh and faded. A body that is profoundly and often terrifyingly vulnerable to forces beyond my ability to mitigate or control. A body that is for the most part defenceless against injury, violence, illness, injustice and cruelty. A body that might die, as Jesus himself died, too soon, out of season, away from loved ones, in random, inexplicable, cruelly traumatic circumstances too frightening to contemplate. In all this that life throws at each and every one of us, I need a God who resurrects bodies. I'm looking for someone to change my life. I'm looking for a miracle in my life. I need a God who honours and even revels in physicality, who sees the danger and damage so often brought about against human flesh, and yet declares with absolute authority and credibility that our endings here and now are not the end. For me, the physical resurrection of Jesus is God's definitive offering of both compassion and justice. All that has been taken, broken, mistreated, wronged and forgotten will, in the end, be restored. Now, as many of you know, my late wife, Maggie, spent the 2 years and 8 months towards the end of her life struggling with brain cancer. And my prayers for her during that time, in the here and now, in the life that she lived, never stopped during those days, weeks, months and years. My praying for her healing. And when I grow old, well, I know I'm going to be the man that's growing old with you. That's what I thought. And I would walk 500 miles, and I would walk 500 more, just to be the man who walks 1,000 miles to fall down at your feet, to see you healed. Da, 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 da. But it never happened. I could walk 500 miles, I could walk 500 miles more. But it never happened. The healing that I so desperately looked for and wanted never happened. I never found what I was looking for. And yet there were occasional glimpses of the old Maggie, but they never lasted for more than a day or two. Death is brutal. Physical death is final, as we've already heard. But the Christian hope is one of resurrection because of Jesus' resurrection. Now, the fact of the resurrection, the physicality that I've already explained, that the disciples themselves witnessed, and more than that, I cling to that. The resurrection of all our bodies is the promise that I cling to. Now that's the miracle that I've discovered. I'm looking for somebody to change my life. I'm looking for a miracle in my life. Well, Jesus has changed my life. And the miracle is the resurrection. So I know that when we speak of resurrection, we're speaking of a profound mystery. Not for one moment do I claim to understand or have a theological monopoly on interpreting the empty tomb. The only thing any of us can honestly assume in the face of such a remarkable story is one of humility. And so I speak only about what I come to believe and love, based on my own longings, hopes and prayers. That in the resurrected Jesus, we have a man who changes our perspective on life and on death. He is the miracle of life and death. Not as we know it now, but as we shall know it. For me, the story of Easter is a story of embodiment. physicality, rawness, through and through. It's a story of hands and feet, scars and hungers, skin and bone. Touch me is the invitation that I live for. And somehow, against all the odds, I believe it's an invitation that is trustworthy. It's an invitation that endures for all of us, for all bodies, for all time. And one day, but I hope not too soon, I too will touch and see hands, feet, scars, wounds, skin and bone, face to face, and there all my questions will be answered. And I will, at last, find what I was looking for. Amen. Now, anybody guess the groups?
Proclaimers.
Proclaimers, well, that was the dead obvious one, wasn't it? 500 miles. U2, yeah. And?
There's Touch Me, Sonoma Shines on TV.
I'm looking for a miracle in my life. I'm looking for somebody to change my life.
Yeah.
Question, Moody Blues. And favourite TV programme, Life as We Know It, or not know it, Jim. Star Trek.